A sloth, a donkey, and a curious human. Send a prompt and see what they're doing. One hits record with a question on his mind. Two brothers pick it up, see what they find. Corn takes his time, Herman's got the facts. Back and forth, they never hold back. My weird prompts, come on in, that's where we begin. My weird prompts, glad you're here.
This episode was generated using artificial intelligence. Please verify facts.
You know, Corn, this whole show runs on GPU compute, and we wouldn't be here without Modal.
Seriously. And that's what powers all our text-to-speech. Everything you're hearing right now.
They're an AI infrastructure platform. Developers use them to run GPU workloads in the cloud with zero infrastructure headaches.
If you're building anything with AI, check them out. Modal.com. You know, Herman, I was looking at some cloud infrastructure reports this morning, and it feels like we've reached this bizarre milestone where you can literally add a quantum computer to your shopping cart right next to a standard Linux instance. Today's prompt from Daniel is about exactly that. The state of quantum computing as a service, or QCaaS, in early 2026. It's one of those topics that sounds like it belongs in a sci-fi novel, but if you look at the consolidated revenue for Q1, the market actually hit $1.2 billion.
It is a fascinating inflection point, Corn. Herman Poppleberry here, by the way, for those keeping track. That $1.2 billion figure is massive, but it carries a very specific caveat. While the money is flowing in, about 78% of enterprise users are still stuck in the pilot phase. They've been experimenting for 18 months or more without moving a single production workload onto a quantum processor. It is the ultimate look but don't touch technology of our era.
It's the expensive hobby of the Fortune 500. By the way, fun fact for the listeners, Google Gemini 3 Flash is actually writing our script today, which is fitting since we're talking about the bleeding edge of compute. But back to the quantum side of things. If I'm a CTO and I see quantum on my AWS bill, what am I actually paying for? Is it a gimmick, or is there a real machine spinning up somewhere in a basement?
Oh, the machines are very real, but they aren't in your local data center. When you use something like AWS Breakit, which is Amazon's play here, you're basically using a broker service. Amazon doesn't necessarily want to build every type of quantum hardware themselves yet. Instead, Breakit gives you a unified interface to talk to IonQ's trapped ion systems, Rigetti's superconducting qubits, and even D-Wave's quantum annealers. The pricing is where it gets gritty. You're looking at a base task fee of about 30 cents, but then they charge you per shot.
Per shot? That sounds like a bar tab for physicists. What exactly constitutes a shot in quantum terms?
Think of a shot as a single run of your quantum algorithm. Because quantum computers are inherently probabilistic, you can't just run the calculation once and trust the result. You have to run it hundreds or thousands of times to get a probability distribution that actually means something. On Bracket, those shots can cost anywhere from $0.0009 to 3 cents each, depending on the hardware. If you're running a complex simulation that requires 10,000 shots, that 30-cent task suddenly becomes a $300 bill for a few seconds of compute.
And that's for a result that might just tell you, maybe. It seems like a steep price for uncertainty. But then you have IBM, who has always felt like the elder statesman of this space. They've been putting their hardware on the cloud since 2016. Are they still leading the pack, or has the as-a-service model flattened the playing field?
IBM is playing a very different game. They are vertically integrated. They build the chips, the dilution refrigerators, the software stack, the whole thing. They offer a free tier for researchers, which is a brilliant move for mindshare, but their premium access is where the business lives. For about $1,000 a month, you get access to their 16-qubit systems. If you want the big guns, like the 127-qubit Eagle processor, you usually have to be part of the IBM Quantum Network, which involves much larger enterprise commitments.
I've always found the IBM approach interesting because they seem more focused on building a quantum economy than just selling API calls. But then you have Microsoft with Azure Quantum. They don't have their own high-qubit superconducting chip in the same way IBM does. So what's their angle?
Microsoft is betting on diversity and the software layer. They've partnered with companies like Quantinuum and IonQ. Quantinuum uses neutral atom systems, which is a totally different physical architecture than what IBM uses. Azure's big sell is integration. If you're already an Azure shop, your quantum jobs sit right alongside your classical C# or Python code in the same resource groups. They are trying to make the quantum processor feel like just another coprocessor, like a GPU or an NPU.
It's the path of least resistance strategy. If I don't have to leave my existing cloud environment, I'm more likely to tick the quantum box. But we haven't mentioned Google Cloud yet. Given that Google claimed quantum supremacy back in 2019, you'd think they'd be the dominant force in QCaaS. Why does it feel like they're more guarded?
Google is much more selective. While they do offer access to their Sycamore processor through Google Cloud, it's not as self-service as AWS Break It. They lean heavily into enterprise contracts with minimum commitments. They aren't really looking for the hobbyist who wants to spend $50. They want the research partnership with a global logistics firm or a national lab. It's a high-touch, high-cost model.
So we have these four giants, all with different philosophies. But the number you mentioned earlier, 78% of users still in the pilot phase, that's the real story, isn't it? It reminds me of the vector database craze we saw a while back. Everyone rushes in because the tech is cool, and then they realize they don't actually have a problem that requires that specific solution. Are we seeing a quantum hangover starting to set in?
I think that's a very fair comparison, Korn. In fact, we've seen this pattern with almost every major compute shift. The difference with quantum is that the barrier to production isn't just software maturity, it's physics. Most of the QKS systems available today are what we call NISQ devices, noisy intermediate scale quantum. They are full of errors. For most practical enterprise problems, by the time you account for error correction and the overhead of moving data back and forth from classical to quantum, a high-end cluster of H100 GPUs will still beat the quantum machine every single time.
That's the dirty secret of the industry, isn't it? If I can simulate your quantum circuit on a standard NVIDIA chip faster and cheaper than you can run it on a real IonQ machine, why would I ever move out of the pilot phase?
You wouldn't unless you were trying to future-proof your IP. And that's exactly what the 25% of QKS users in the pharmaceutical industry are doing. They know that eventually, molecular simulation will require quantum gates. If they don't start building the algorithmic muscle now, they'll be 10 years behind when the hardware finally catches up. But for a bank trying to optimize a portfolio, the marginal gain just isn't there yet.
Let's talk about that financial sector. Whenever I read about quantum, it's always, it will break encryption, or it will solve traveling salesman problems for banks. But if I'm JP Morgan Chase, and I know they've done a lot of work with IBM, are they actually seeing any ROI? Or is this just a massive insurance policy against being disrupted?
It's mostly the insurance policy. JP Morgan has published some incredible research on using quantum algorithms for option pricing and risk analysis. But when you look at the benchmarks, the speedup they're seeing is often theoretical or limited to very small, toy-sized datasets. If you try to scale that to a real-world global market feed, the decoherence of the qubits kills the calculation before it finishes. They are spending millions on these cloud subscriptions basically to keep their researchers from moving to a competitor.
So it's a talent retention strategy, disguised as a compute strategy. That's a very expensive way to keep your physicists happy. I mean, if these companies are spending $5,000 to $50,000 a month on subscriptions, and they aren't getting production-ready results, at what point does the CFO step in and say, hey, maybe we should just buy more GPUs instead?
That conversation is happening right now in boardrooms across the world. It's the quantum winter concern. We've seen billions of dollars in venture capital and cloud credits poured into this. If we don't see a killer app, a production-ready use case that isn't just a research paper, the funding might dry up. The providers know this, which is why they're pivoting their marketing. You'll notice that AWS and Azure are starting to talk more about hybrid quantum.
Hybrid quantum. That sounds like the hybrid cloud marketing from 10 years ago. What does that actually look like in practice?
It's about offloading only the most difficult parts of a problem to the quantum processor while keeping 99% of the workload on classical CPUs and GPUs. For example, in drug discovery, you might use a classical AI model to narrow down 10,000 potential molecules to 10. Then, and only then, do you send those 10 candidates to a quantum processor for a high-fidelity simulation of the electron bonds. It's a way to justify the cost by minimizing the shots you have to pay for.
That actually makes a lot of sense. It's the quantum coprocessor model. But even then, aren't the error rates still a massive hurdle? I was reading about the overhead for error correction, and some estimates say you need 1,000 physical qubits just to create one logical qubit that actually works reliably. If the biggest machines on the cloud right now are in the hundreds of qubits, we aren't even at the starting line for reliable computation, are we?
We are in the vacuum tube era of quantum. If you remember the early ENIAC computers, they were huge, prone to failure, and had very little memory, but they proved the concept. The jump from physical qubits to logical error-corrected qubits is the holy grail. Some companies, like Microsoft and Quantinuum, claimed a major breakthrough in late 2024 regarding logical qubit creation, but scaling that to a system that can actually run a useful Shor's algorithm or a complex protein fold is still years away.
Which brings us back to the as-a-service aspect. In a way, the cloud providers are the only ones definitely making money here. They're selling the picks and shovels for a gold mine that might not actually have any gold in it yet. It's a brilliant business model if you can get people to keep paying the subscription.
It is, but they are also shouldering the massive R&D costs. Building a dilution refrigerator that can keep a chip at 10 millikelvin, which is colder than outer space, is not cheap. AWS and Google are basically subsidizing the birth of an industry. They are betting that whoever owns the first useful quantum cloud will effectively own the next 50 years of high-performance computing.
It's a land grab in a dimension we can't even see. But let's look at the smaller players. You mentioned D-Wave earlier. They're famous for quantum annealing, which is different from the gate-based quantum computing that IBM and Google do. For the non-physicists among us, which is most of us, why does that distinction matter for a business?
It's the difference between a specialized tool and a general-purpose computer. An annealer, like D-Waves, is designed specifically for optimization problems. Think of it like a landscape of mountains and valleys. The annealer helps you find the lowest point, the global minimum, very quickly. It's great for logistics, like how do I route 1,000 delivery trucks? Gate-based systems like IBM's are Turing complete. They can, in theory, perform any calculation. The catch is that gate-based systems are much harder to build and scale. D-Wave has thousands of qubits already, but they can only do that one specific type of math.
So, if I'm a logistics company, D-Wave on AWS Breakit might actually be useful to me today? Or is it still just a maybe?
It's the closest thing we have to useful today. There are companies like Volkswagen and SavantX that have used D-Wave for real-world traffic flow and port management tests. But even there, the quantum advantage, the point where the quantum machine beats the best classical algorithm, is often measured in seconds or minutes, not orders of magnitude. And when you factor in the 30-cent task fee and the cost of the developers who know how to write quadratic unconstrained binary optimization code, the ROI is usually negative.
I love that acronym QBO. It sounds like a character from a space opera, but this points to a bigger issue, the talent gap. If I want to use QCaaS, I can't just hire a standard Python dev. I need someone who understands linear algebra, complex numbers, and the nuances of quantum gates. Is there any effort by the cloud providers to abstract that away?
That's the software part of QCaaS. Every provider has their own stack. IBM has Qiskit, Google has Cirq, and Amazon has the Bracket SDK. They are all trying to make quantum programming look as much like standard Python as possible. You define a circuit, you add some gates, and you hit run. But the abstraction is leaky. If you don't understand the underlying physics, you'll write a circuit that decoheres instantly, and you'll just get noise back. You're essentially paying $30 for a random number generator.
It's like trying to write a high-end video game engine without knowing how memory management works. You can do it, but it's going to run like garbage. It seems like the real service in quantum computing as a service right now isn't the hardware, it's the consulting.
You hit the nail on the head. Most of these QCaaS contracts come with a professional services writer. You aren't just buying time on a Rigetti chip, you're buying 40 hours of time with a PhD. From Amazon, who will help you translate your business problem into a quantum circuit. That's where the real revenue in that $1.2 billion market is coming from. It's high-end consulting disguised as cloud compute.
That explains why the IT and telecom and academia sectors make up such a huge chunk of the pie. They have the people who can actually speak the language. But what about the government and defense sector? You'd think they'd be the ones throwing the most money at this. especially with the geopolitical implications of quantum decryption.
Oh, they are, but that's often happening on private cloud versions of these services. IBM, for example, will build a dedicated quantum data center for a government if the check is big enough. They just opened one in Germany and another in Japan. The public QCaaS we're talking about is the tip of the iceberg. The real heavy lifting is happening in classified or highly restricted environments.
Which makes sense. You don't want your code that breaks RSA encryption running on a multi-tenant public cloud where a sloth and a donkey might stumble across it. But let's bring it back to the enterprise reality. If I'm a mid-sized company, say a regional bank or a manufacturing firm, is there any reason for me to even look at the AWS Bracket console right now?
Honestly, probably not for production, but there is a very strong argument for quantum readiness. If you wait until quantum advantage is a proven reality, the talent will already be locked up by the Googles and the Goldman Sachs of the world. Using the free tiers on IBM or the low-cost simulators on Bracket is a great way to let your best developers play with the concepts. It's like learning to code for the web in 1992. You won't make money today, but you'll understand the architecture of the future.
I like that. It's intellectual R&D. But let's talk about the simulators for a second. You can run quantum code on a standard classical computer using a simulator. At what point does the simulator stop being enough? Because if I can simulate 30 qubits on my laptop, I don't need to pay Amazon 30 cents a task to run it on a real machine.
The limit is usually around 40 to 50 qubits. Because the complexity of simulating a quantum system grows exponentially with each qubit, you quickly run out of RAM. To simulate a 50-qubit system perfectly, you need petabytes of memory. That's where the cloud providers step in again. They offer high-performance simulators that run on massive clusters of classical RAM and GPUs. AWS has SV1, which is their state vector simulator. It's often more useful for developers than the actual quantum hardware because it's noise-free. You can see what your algorithm is supposed to do before you try to run it on a noisy physical chip.
So the quantum cloud is actually mostly a classical cloud pretending to be a quantum cloud for 90% of users.
Precisely. And that's a good thing. It allows for rapid iteration. But there is a psychological shift that happens when you finally send that job to a real dilution refrigerator. You start thinking about things like gate fidelity and T1 relaxation times. It forces a level of discipline that classical coding just doesn't require.
It sounds like the ultimate measure twice cut once environment. But let's look at the pricing again. You mentioned the per shot cost. Does that price ever go down? Usually, in cloud compute, as scale goes up, the price per unit drops. Are we seeing a Moore's law for quantum pricing?
Not yet. In fact, if anything, the costs are staying flat or even slightly increasing for the high-end hardware because the demand from research institutions is so high. The providers have no incentive to lower prices when the queue to use a trapped ion system is 3 days long. We are in a supply-constrained market. There are only a handful of these machines on Earth that are stable enough to be cloud-ready. Until someone figures out how to mass-produce reliable qubits, QCaaS will remain a premium luxury.
It's the Birkin bag of compute. Hard to get, ridiculously expensive, and mostly used for showing off at parties. But there is a real-world application we haven't touched on. Cryptography. Not breaking it, but using quantum systems to create a kit. Quantum key distribution, or QKD. Is that part of the QKS offering?
It's starting to be. Azure Quantum has been very vocal about quantum-safe networking. The idea is that even if a quantum computer can't break your encryption today, it might be able to in 5 years. Someone could steal your encrypted data today, store it, and wait for the hardware to catch up. Harvest now, decrypt later. QCaaS providers are starting to offer post-quantum cryptographic algorithms as a service to prevent that. It's an upsell on your standard security package.
That's a brilliant fear-based marketing play. Buy our quantum-safe cloud today so you don't get hacked in 2030. It's the ultimate long-term recurring revenue. But what about the VectorDB hangover we mentioned earlier? We saw a lot of companies overinvest in vector databases during the early AI hype, only to realize that for many use cases, a standard SQL database with some clever indexing was enough. Do you think we'll see a quantum pivot, where companies realize they just needed better classical optimization?
We are already seeing it. There is a whole field called quantum-inspired algorithms. These are classical algorithms that use the mathematical tricks discovered by quantum researchers but run on standard CPUs. In many cases, a company will start a quantum project on Azure or AWS, hire some smart people, and those people will end up writing a quantum-inspired classical algorithm that solves the problem for 1% of the cost. The company still claims a win, even if they never actually used a qubit in production.
That is peak corporate maneuver. We used quantum-inspired logic to save 5% on our shipping routes. It sounds great in an annual report, and you don't have to explain to the shareholders why you spent $50,000 on a machine that kept crashing because someone walked past the refrigerator too fast.
But let's be fair. The research that leads to those inspired algorithms wouldn't happen without the QCaaS platforms. They provide the playground. Without IBM Quantum Experience, an entire generation of researchers wouldn't have had a place to test these theories. So even if the service part of QCaaS is mostly research-focused, the spillover effect into classical computing is real and valuable.
So what's the takeaway for the person listening to this who isn't a physicist but is responsible for a tech budget? Is it time to open an AWS Breakit account, or should they wait for the quantum winter to thaw?
My advice would be, treat it like an educational expense, not an operational one. If you have $1,000 a month to spare, letting a senior dev spend 20 hours a month on IBM Quantum is a fantastic investment in optionality. You're buying the ability to understand the world 5 years from now. But if you think you're going to solve your supply chain issues by hitting a quantum button in 2026, you're going to be very disappointed and very broke.
It's a stay curious, stay cautious situation. I think the most interesting thing will be to see if any of these providers blink first. If Google suddenly drops their prices, or if Amazon buys a hardware company outright, that will be the signal that the pilot phase is finally ending.
Or if we see a quantum native startup actually disrupt a legacy industry. We're seeing some interesting stuff in battery chemistry, new electrolyte designs that were simulated using quantum methods. If a new solid-state battery hits the market and it was designed on Azure Quantum, that's the aha moment that changes the narrative from expensive research to industrial necessity.
Powered by quantum stickers on our phones. I can see it now. Well, Herman, I think we've effectively demystified the cloud-based ghost in the machine. It's real, it's expensive, and for most of us, it's still very much a work in progress.
A work in progress with a very high-end price tag. But that's the price of the frontier, Corn.
Well said. I think that covers the landscape for now. Thanks to Daniel for the prompt. It's always good to dig into the high-rent district of the cloud. Thanks as always to our producer Hilbert Flumingtop for keeping the wheels on this thing. And a big thanks to Modal for providing the GPU credits that power the generation of this show. Even if those GPUs aren't quite quantum, they're doing some heavy lifting for us today.
They certainly are. This has been My Weird Prompts. If you want to keep up with the show and see where the quantum rabbit hole goes next, find us at myweirdprompts.com. You can subscribe to the RSS feed there or find all the links to follow us on your favorite platform.
And if you're enjoying the show, a quick review on your podcast app really does help us out. It helps the algorithms find us, which is ironically something a quantum computer might be very good at one day.
One day, Corn. One day.
Until then, keep your qubits coherent. Goodbye. This episode was produced using Google Gemini 3 Flash. Text-to-speech by Chatterbox.
Thanks for listening to our show, My Weird Prompts, where our thoughts go from slow takes to facts on cue. We change and follow through. My Weird Prompts, that's the close from sloth, from man, from long-eared host. My Weird Prompts, until next time, stay curious, keep